the last Apache woman on the auction block, unwanted, filthy, starving, until a cowboy made her his wife. The town itself was a scattering of wooden buildings, dusty streets, and rough-hewn fences, with smoke curling from chimneys into the pale sky. Life here was hard, shaped by the unforgiving land, the cold, and the constant threat of danger. People worked from sunrise to sunset, tending to their horses, repairing wagons, or chopping wood for the fire. It was the kind of place where survival mattered more than comfort, and every day brought its own set of challenges. On this particular winter morning, the town felt especially tense. A crowd had gathered near the edge of the square, their breath forming clouds in the frosty air. Whispers spread from person to person, carried on the sharp wind, and curiosity twined with unease. Something unusual was happening, something that drew people from their homes and workshops to witness it. At the center of the crowd stood a group of soldiers and townsmen, their expressions a mixture of pride and caution. They were leading a young woman, her hands tied in front of her and her feet dragging slightly in the snow. Her name was Naeli, though most of the people here had never heard it and did not care to. She was from the Apache tribe, one of the many indigenous groups whose lives had been upended by the arrival of settlers and soldiers in the region. Naeli was only 19, though the hardship and fear she had endured made her look older. Her dark hair hung in uneven strands around her face, matted and dull from weeks without proper care. Her clothes were torn and filthy, and the cold had seeped into her bones, making her shiver despite the thin layers she wore. Her skin, once a warm, healthy brown, was streaked with dirt and frostbite, evidence of the long, hard journey that had brought her here. She walked slowly, her bare ankles chafed by the rough ropes and her stomach hollow from hunger. Each step felt heavy, not just because of her exhaustion, but because of the weight of fear and uncertainty pressing down on her. She had been taken during a raid on her village, a brutal event that left her family scattered and broken. She remembered the smoke rising from the fires, the shouting, the sound of horses' hooves pounding the ground, and the desperate cries of her people. She remembered trying to protect her younger brother, only to be separated from him when soldiers seized her. That memory still burned in her mind, a scar that refused to fade. Now, as she was pushed toward the town square, Naeli felt the eyes of the crowd on her. Some were curious, some indifferent, and some openly hostile. She had seen this look before, the one that reduced a person to something less than human. They did not see her as a person with thoughts, feelings, or memories. They saw only the label they had been given. The last Apache woman, a prize to be bought, a possession to be claimed. The thought made her stomach twist, a mixture of anger and shame, though she refused to show it. She had learned long ago that showing weakness would invite cruelty, and she had already suffered enough for one lifetime. The soldiers led her to a raised wooden platform in the center of the square. It was crude but functional, built for events like this, where people were displayed and sold. Naeli climbed onto it unsteadily, her legs shaking from cold and exhaustion. The crowd pressed in closer, murmuring among themselves. Some men spat into the snow, making her flinch, while others simply stared, their faces unreadable. The auction was about to begin, and Naeli knew there was no way to escape. The ropes cut into her wrists, reminding her that she was trapped, that her fate rested in the hands of strangers who had no compassion for her suffering. Despite the fear, a small part of her mind refused to give in completely. Naeli had been taught the ways of her people, lessons passed down from her mother and grandmother about resilience, courage, and endurance. Even in the darkest moments, they had told her, one could find strength. She clung to that memory now, letting it bolster her trembling body. She straightened her shoulders as best as she could and lifted her chin, meeting the gaze of those around her with as much dignity as she could muster. It was not much, but it was enough to remind her, and perhaps even the people watching, that she was not completely defeated. The auctioneer stepped onto the platform, his voice loud and commanding as he called for attention. He was a tall man with a booming voice, used to the business of buying and selling, and he treated Naomi no differently than he would a horse or a cow. He spoke in sharp, clipped sentences, describing her as a fine specimen and strong for work, ignoring the fact that she was exhausted, hungry, and frightened beyond measure. The words felt like blows, each one stripping away a little more of her sense of self. Naomi's lips pressed together to keep from speaking, from crying out, or from retaliating. She had learned that words often did not help in situations like this. They could make things worse. Around her, the crowd shifted and murmured. Some men raised their hands, bidding without thinking, treating the event as entertainment rather than the tragic reality it represented. Naomi felt each glance as a weight, pressing down on her chest. Some faces were cruel, some indifferent, but a few were curious in a quiet, almost hesitant way. Those few made her wonder if there could be something different, if there could be a person among them who might see her not as a prize but as a human being. That thought was fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind, but it was the only light she had in that cold, unforgiving place. Her mind drifted to memories of her village, of the warm evenings by the fire, the songs her mother sang, and the stories her grandmother told. She remembered the smell of the earth after rain, the taste of corn roasted over an open flame, and the laughter of her younger siblings as they played. Those memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what she had lost, but they also gave her something to hold on to. Even in this moment of humiliation and fear, Naomi clung to the idea that life could still hold beauty, that she could survive, and that one day she might find a place where she could belong again. The crowd grew louder as the auctioneer continued his call, and Naomi's thoughts returned to the present. She felt the ropes biting into her wrists, her stomach empty, and her body trembling from cold. Yet even as her situation seemed hopeless, she refused to break entirely. There was a small, stubborn spark within her that refused to die, a part of her that remembered who she was and where she came from. That spark was all she had, but it was enough to keep her standing, to keep her breathing, and to keep her hoping, quietly, silently, in the deepest part of her heart, that someone might come along who would see her as more than the dust, dirt, and fear that surrounded her. As the auction began, Naomi's eyes scanned the crowd, noting every face, every gesture. Some men raised their eyebrows, others leaned forward in interest, and a few laughed quietly among themselves. She did not know who would bid or what would happen next, but she braced herself. She had endured much already, and she could endure a little more. Each passing moment, each whispered conversation, each cold stare, was a test of her patience and strength. Naomi told herself she would survive, she must. There was no other choice. And so she stood, shivering in the winter wind, ropes cutting into her wrists, dirt smeared across her skin, and hunger gnawing at her stomach. Yet despite it all, she held her head high, a quiet, stubborn defiance burning in her dark eyes. She was the last Apache woman on the auction block, unwanted and abandoned by the world, but even in that desperate, terrifying moment, she was still Naomi. And somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, her story was not yet finished. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the frozen town square, harsh and commanding, cutting through the whispers and murmurs of the crowd. Naomi could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some cruel, some indifferent. She shivered, not only from the cold but from the awareness that her fate rested in the hands of strangers. Her stomach growled, a sharp reminder of how long it had been since she had eaten, but she had no way to quiet it. She forced herself to focus on breathing slowly, keeping her trembling under control, and trying not to let fear show in her posture. The first man raised his hand and called out a number. Naomi did not understand the numbers, but she could sense the cold, transactional way he spoke, as if she were an object rather than a human being. The auctioneer nodded, repeating the number with an air of finality, as though it confirmed her worth. Naomi felt a pang of shame and humiliation. She knew that in this town, her life was measured by coins and the strength of her body. She was more than that, she told herself silently, but who would listen? Who could see past the dirt and the tattered clothing, past the fear and the hunger to see the real her? A few more men bid, their voices loud and confident. Naomi could feel their eyes on her, scanning her like she was a piece of property, judging her every movement, her every expression. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other, making small jokes or comments that she could not fully understand. She caught a few words: weak, sturdy enough for work, might be useful around a ranch. Each word cut deeper than the last, a reminder that the world outside her village did not care for her dreams, her feelings, or her life before captivity. But even as the words stung, Naomi held herself upright. She remembered the lessons her mother had taught her, lessons of patience, of endurance, of strength even when all seemed lost. She would not allow herself to collapse here, not in front of this crowd. She forced her gaze forward, refusing to meet the eyes of those who seemed only to take pleasure in her discomfort. Deep inside, she held onto the hope that someone, somewhere, might see her not as an object but as a person. That hope was fragile, but it was a lifeline she could not let go. The bidding continued, each man trying to outdo the other. Naomi felt a mixture of fear and frustration. Fear because she did not know what awaited her if she was sold to the highest bidder, and frustration because she could do nothing to influence her own fate. She wanted to speak, to plead, to explain that she was not for sale, that she had a life, a family, and a history that mattered. But no words could change the reality of the ropes binding her wrists, the rough wooden platform under her feet, or the laws and customs of this new, harsh world. As she stood there, the cold seeping into her bones, Naomi's mind wandered to her village once more. She remembered the quiet mornings by the river, the sound of water running over stones, the soft calls of birds greeting the sunrise. She remembered the laughter of children playing in the open fields, the warmth of her grandmother's hands as they worked together to prepare food, and the stories told by the elders around the fire. Those memories brought a mix of sorrow and strength. She missed that life deeply, yet it reminded her that she had once known safety, love, and belonging. Perhaps, she thought, she could find some version of that again, even in this cold and cruel place. A man in the crowd laughed loudly, drawing attention to Naomi's dirt-streaked face and her worn clothing. The sound was mocking, and she felt her cheeks burn, though she tried not to show it. She had learned early that anger or tears would not help her. They would only make others more cruel. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing, on steadying her shaking legs, and on keeping her eyes forward. Every second she stayed calm was a small victory, a reminder that she had survived worse before and could survive this as well. The auctioneer, noticing the pause, raised his voice again. He called for higher bids, gesturing at Naomi as though she were a prize at a fair. More hands went up. Naomi felt a cold wave of despair wash over her. She had been strong and proud in her village, able to help her family and protect those she loved. Here, in this square, she felt stripped of everything that had made her whole. Yet she refused to give in to hopelessness entirely. She reminded herself that her worth was not determined by the coins tossed at the auctioneer or the opinions of strangers. She had survived the raid, the long march, and weeks of hunger. She could survive this too. As the bidding went on, Naomi noticed a man standing slightly apart from the rest of the crowd. He was different from the others, not laughing, not whispering, not leering. He watched quietly, with a calmness that seemed almost out of place in this chaotic scene. Naomi did not know his intentions, and she did not dare hope that he might be different from the others. Still, there was something in the way he observed her that felt less threatening, less dismissive. A tiny spark of curiosity and hope stirred within her, though she kept it hidden like a fragile bird in a cage. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The cold bit at her fingers and toes, the ropes chafed her wrists, and her stomach ached from emptiness. Yet she remained standing, refusing to collapse, refusing to cry out. Naily focused on the rhythm of her own heartbeat, on the sound of the wind whistling through the wooden buildings, and on the distant memory of her family's laughter. Each thought was a lifeline, each memory a shield against the despair threatening to overwhelm her. Finally, the auctioneer's voice rose above the murmur of the crowd, calling for final bids. Naeli could feel the tension in the air, a sharp pressure that seemed to press down on her chest. She looked around, scanning the faces once more, her eyes lingering briefly on the quiet man she had noticed earlier. He had not spoken, had not laughed, had not raised his hand yet. There was a stillness about him that contrasted sharply with the rest of the crowd, and for reasons she could not explain, it made her feel a little less alone. The other men called out their numbers, some louder, some more aggressive, but Naeli barely registered them. Her thoughts clung to that small spark of curiosity, the possibility that someone might treat her with a measure of respect, might see her as more than an object to be sold. It was a fragile hope, and she did not dare let it grow too large, for fear that disappointment would crush her. Yet even a tiny flicker of hope was enough to give her the strength to remain standing, to endure the jeers and whispers, and to survive each passing moment. As the auction came to its close, Naeli felt the ropes on her wrists tighten slightly, a reminder that the final decision was imminent. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, and tried to center herself. She reminded herself of who she was, a young woman from the Apache tribe, strong, proud, and resilient. She had survived the raid, hunger, and cold. She had endured countless hardships and yet was still alive. No matter what happened next, she could endure this too. When she opened her eyes again, the quiet man stepped forward. He spoke to the auctioneer in a calm voice, a number that was higher than the others but not aggressive or mocking. Naeli's heart skipped a beat, though she did not know why. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he watched her, that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that she might not be entirely alone. That perhaps, even in this frozen, cruel place, there could be someone who saw her as a person, someone who could offer a measure of safety and dignity. Though she could not speak, could not move, Naeli felt a small sense of relief. The rope still bound her, the platform was still cold and rough beneath her feet, and her stomach still ached with hunger. Yet for the first time that day, she felt a flicker of hope, a quiet, fragile promise that perhaps this chapter of her life was not yet over, and that someone might see her not as a prize, but as a human being worthy of care, respect, and compassion. The wind had grown sharper as the afternoon stretched on, carrying a bitter chill through the town square. Naeli stood on the platform, her body tense, her wrists still bound with rough ropes and her eyes scanning the crowd. The auction had continued for what felt like hours, though the cold made time feel strange, stretched, and heavy. She was exhausted, hungry, and her skin burned from the cold that had crept into her bones. The jeers and laughter of the crowd pressed down on her like a weight, but she clung stubbornly to her quiet defiance. She refused to show the depth of her fear. She could not give them the satisfaction of breaking her spirit. Then, among the men bidding and whispering, a new figure arrived. He was taller than most of the townsfolk, dressed in worn but sturdy clothes typical of a cowboy. His hat shaded his face, but his posture was straight, confident, and calm. He did not push his way through the crowd or call attention to himself. Instead, he moved with an easy awareness, stepping into the circle of spectators as though he belonged but was not impressed by the chaos. Naeli noticed him immediately. There was something different about him, a calm that did not seek power, a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the greed and mockery around her. The auctioneer, seeing a new bidder, called out for attention. The cowboy raised his hand, his voice clear and steady as he spoke a number that immediately silenced some of the more boisterous bidders. Naomi felt her heart skip a beat, though she did not know why. There was no threat in his tone, no cruelty. He did not lean in to whisper insults or make jokes at her expense. Instead, he simply spoke, quietly, with authority that commanded respect without demanding it. The crowd seemed to take notice, their murmurs quieting as they realized he was serious. The cowboy approached the auctioneer, and for the first time that day, Naomi felt a strange sense of hope. She did not understand why, but the way he looked at her, truly looked at her, felt different. His eyes were steady, calm, and seemed to see beyond the dirt, the tattered clothing and the tired, hungry expression that had marked her for days. It was a look that acknowledged her as a person, not as property, not as an object to be sold. Naomi held her breath, unsure whether to allow herself to hope or to brace for disappointment. Hope, she had learned, could be a dangerous thing, but even so, a small spark flickered in her chest. The auctioneer repeated the cowboy's bid, and a few men hesitated, clearly surprised by the quiet confidence with which he spoke. Others scoffed, assuming the man was inexperienced, perhaps even foolish, to spend so much for her. Naomi could hear the whispers, the small scoffs, the quiet disapproval, but she also noticed the way the cowboy did not react to their opinions. He was unshaken, focused entirely on the matter at hand. His calm presence stood in stark contrast to the rest of the crowd, and for Naomi, it was almost like a lifeline thrown to her across a sea of despair. As the bidding concluded, the cowboy made his final offer. The auctioneer repeated it, louder this time, and the murmurs of the crowd fell into silence. Naomi felt her stomach tighten, not from hunger this time, but from a mixture of anxiety and cautious hope. She did not yet know what this man's intentions were, and she had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Still, there was something in the way he stood, in the quiet strength of his gaze, that made her heart whisper that perhaps, for the first time since the raid, her life might change. The auctioneer nodded, signaling the end of the bidding. The cowboy had won. Naomi did not move immediately. Her body was stiff from the cold and tension, and her mind struggled to process what had just happened. She was no longer the property of whoever had shouted the loudest or laughed the hardest. She had been chosen, not by force, but by intention. There was a strange, almost unreal sense of relief that washed over her, mingled with cautious uncertainty. Who was this man? What would happen now? Could she trust him? The cowboy stepped forward slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving hers. He spoke, his voice calm and kind. "Don't be afraid. I don't want to hurt you. I only want to help." Naomi blinked at him, unsure whether she should trust his words. She had heard promises before, false promises from soldiers, traders, and men who claimed to care, only to abandon or betray her. But there was something genuine in his tone, something steady and unshakable. She sensed, deep down, that he meant what he said. Carefully, the cowboy knelt slightly, reaching toward her without touching her roughly. He motioned to the ropes binding her wrists. "Let me help you with these," he said gently. Naomi hesitated. Her entire life had taught her caution, that trust could lead to pain. But there was no cruelty in his eyes, no mocking smile, no impatience. Slowly, almost tentatively, she allowed him to loosen the ropes. The rough cords fell away, and for the first time in hours, or perhaps days, she felt a small measure of freedom. Her wrists burned slightly from the tight ropes, but the relief of their removal outweighed the discomfort. Once her hands were free, the cowboy stood and offered her his arm, not as a master to property, but as a gesture of protection. "You can come with me," he said simply. "You don't have to stay here." Naomi looked at him, and for a long moment her mind was a whirl of fear, uncertainty, and disbelief. Could she leave with this stranger? Could she trust that he would not betray her, as so many others had? And yet, in his calm, steady presence, she felt something she had not felt in a long time: safety. Slowly, carefully, Naeli took his arm. The crowd murmured again, some whispering in surprise, others openly skeptical, but the cowboy paid them no mind. He led her away from the auction block, down the frozen streets of the town, past the wooden buildings and the watching townsfolk, who could not hide their curiosity. Naeli's legs felt unsteady beneath her, but she kept moving, trusting the steady strength of the man beside her. Each step was a mixture of fear and cautious hope, a strange and unfamiliar feeling that made her heart beat faster. As they walked, Naeli felt a flood of emotions: relief that the auction was over, fear of the unknown future, and a small, stubborn spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this man could be different. She remembered her family, her village, and the life she had lost, and she allowed herself to imagine a future where she might live again, not in fear, but with a measure of dignity and safety. The cowboy's presence was a quiet reassurance, a constant in a world that had been unpredictable and harsh for far too long. Finally, they reached the edge of the town, where the buildings gave way to open land and rolling hills. The cowboy stopped, turning to face her fully. "You don't have to say anything now," he said softly. "Just know that I don't mean you harm. I only want to help you find a place where you can be safe and cared for." Naeli nodded slightly, unable to find her voice immediately. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had endured too much to break down now. And yet, even as she held back the tears, she felt a strange warmth in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in months: trust. The cowboy led her to his horse, a strong and patient animal that seemed to sense her fear and adjusted its stance accordingly. He helped her climb into the saddle, steadying her as she found her balance. For a moment, Naeli felt a sense of disbelief. She had been so accustomed to fear, hunger, and cold, and now she was on a horse, moving away from the auction, with a man who seemed intent on helping her rather than harming her. The feeling was disorienting but also comforting, and she allowed herself, just slightly, to breathe easier. As they rode away from the town, the snow crunching beneath the horse's hooves, Naeli glanced back at the square, at the crowd, and at the auction block that had seemed like the end of the world. And yet here she was, alive, moving forward, with a stranger who had chosen to see her humanity. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope, not wildly, not carelessly, but carefully, cautiously, like a fragile flower peeking through the snow. And deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps her story was not yet finished. That maybe, just maybe, life could still hold kindness, dignity, and safety, even in a world that had often been cruel and unforgiving. The journey away from the town was long, and the cold wind cut across the open plains, but Naeli felt something she had not felt in months: fragile sense of safety. The cowboy rode beside her patiently, his horse steady and calm, matching her pace. Naeli kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, trying not to look back at the town that had seen her reduced to a prize. The snow beneath them reflected the pale winter sunlight, making the landscape look both beautiful and harsh. It was a world unfamiliar to her, vast and empty, and yet somehow it felt less frightening than the crowded, judgmental square she had just left. When they finally reached the cowboy's homestead, Naeli was struck by the simplicity and sturdiness of it. The house was small but well kept, made of timber with a stone chimney that puffed out smoke. There were barns and pens for animals, a garden that must have been tended with care, and tools neatly arranged outside. Naeli could smell the warmth of wood smoke and the faint scent of animals. It was a life shaped by work and discipline, but also by care. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope that she might belong somewhere again. The cowboy helped her down from the horse and led her inside the house. The warmth hit her immediately, melting some of the cold that had settled into her bones. She shivered, not from fear this time, but from relief and exhaustion. The cowboy placed a thick blanket around her shoulders and gestured toward a small stove where a pot simmered. "You must be hungry," he said softly. Naomi nodded, too tired and shy to speak. She could feel her stomach tighten in anticipation. Food, warmth, safety, things she had almost forgotten existed, were suddenly within reach. He set a simple meal in front of her, stew with vegetables and small pieces of meat, bread, and warm water. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she ate, not just from hunger but from disbelief. She had not expected kindness or care in so long, and it felt strange, almost overwhelming. The cowboy watched her quietly, giving her space but offering reassurance with his calm presence. There was no rush, no judgment, no impatience, only the simple offer of care, which Naomi had learned to cherish more than anything. After she finished eating, the cowboy sat across from her and spoke gently. "I know it will take time," he said. "I don't expect you to trust me right away. You've been through a lot, but you don't have to be afraid here. You are safe." Naomi nodded slowly. Words were difficult. Her voice had been quiet for so long, and she was not sure if she could speak freely without trembling. But she understood him. His calm tone, the steadiness in his eyes, and the lack of any pressure gave her a measure of comfort she had not felt in weeks. The first days in the homestead were challenging. Naomi had to adjust to a new routine, one that included caring for herself and eventually helping with the household and animals. Everything was unfamiliar. The smell of the stables, the rhythm of feeding animals, chopping firewood, cooking over an open flame, and maintaining the small garden. Her hands were raw and sore from tasks she had never done before, but the cowboy guided her patiently, showing her each step without scolding or frustration. Each small success, lighting the stove, gathering water, feeding the animals, was a quiet victory, and Naomi began to feel a sense of pride she had almost forgotten. There were also moments of fear. At night, when the wind howled and the house creaked, Naomi's mind would drift back to the auction, to the soldiers, and to the raid on her village. She would lie awake, imagining the worst, wondering if this safety was only temporary. But the cowboy would always notice her anxiety, quietly offering reassurance with a touch on her shoulder, a warm blanket, or simply speaking her name softly. Over time, she began to realize that fear could be met with care, that not all men were cruel or indifferent, and that perhaps she could begin to trust again. As the weeks passed, Naomi slowly began to adapt to her new life. She learned how to tend the animals, how to gather water from the nearby stream, and how to cook simple meals on her own. Each day brought new challenges, but also new successes. The cowboy encouraged her, praising her efforts without making her feel pressured or embarrassed. She found a rhythm in the work, and in that rhythm, a sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she felt useful and valued for her abilities rather than judged for her past. Evenings were particularly important. After the work was done, the cowboy would sit by the fire and talk quietly. He did not press her to speak if she did not want to, but he shared stories of his life, his work on the ranch, and sometimes of the hardships he had faced. Naomi listened, slowly feeling that she could share her own stories one day, too. The quiet companionship, the respect he showed her, and the patience he exercised became a new kind of safety for her. It was not flashy or loud. It was steady, gentle, and reliable, a stark contrast to the chaos and cruelty she had known in the auction square. Over time, the relationship between them began to grow beyond simple trust. Naomi learned that the cowboy valued honesty, kindness, and resilience. She, in turn, shared pieces of her past carefully, small memories of her family, the songs her mother had sung, the lessons her grandmother had taught her. Each story was a bridge slowly connecting her world with his. The cowboy listened without judgment, absorbing her words with care, and in his presence, Naomi began to feel that she could heal from the traumas she had endured. Still, life was not easy. The seasons changed, bringing new challenges, freezing mornings, sudden storms, and the endless work required to maintain the homestead. Naeli's body ached from the labor, and there were moments when despair threatened to creep back in. But she also discovered a strength she had not known before, a resilience born from survival, from adapting to new circumstances, and from the quiet support of someone who treated her with respect. Each day she overcame a new difficulty. She grew more confident in her own abilities and more certain that she could survive and even thrive in this new life. The cowboy continued to be a patient teacher. He encouraged her to ride the horses, to help with repairing fences, and to learn about the land around them. Naeli's confidence grew with each small success. She discovered that she could control the horse, that she could handle the tools, and that she could contribute meaningfully to the household. The pride she felt in her growing abilities was matched only by the relief of being accepted, not as a servant, but as a partner in daily life. Through all this, Naeli began to understand the importance of patience and trust. She had survived betrayal and cruelty, but she was learning that life could also offer kindness and protection. The cowboy never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give, and never treated her past as something shameful. Slowly she allowed herself to relax, to laugh quietly at small mistakes, and to find joy in the work and the quiet moments by the fire. The small garden flourished under their care, the animals grew strong, and the house became a place of warmth, safety, and stability. By the time spring arrived, Naeli had changed in ways that went beyond physical strength. Her spirit, once fragile and wary, had begun to mend. She could ride the horses confidently, tend the garden, and cook meals that brought warmth and comfort to the homestead. She had a sense of belonging for the first time since the raid, a feeling that she was not simply surviving, but living. And while the memories of her past would never fully leave her, she had learned that she could carry them without being crushed, that she could honor her heritage and history while also embracing this new chapter of her life. The cowboy, too, had changed. His quiet patience, respect, and guidance had forged a bond between them that went beyond simple care. He had shown Naeli that people could be trusted, that kindness could exist in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, and that she could reclaim a measure of freedom and dignity even after enduring unimaginable hardships. Together, they faced the challenges of daily life on the frontier, learning from each other, supporting each other, and slowly building a new life that neither had expected but both had come to value deeply. And so, in the quiet rhythm of work, the warmth of shared meals, the guidance of patient teaching, and the trust slowly growing between them, Naeli began to understand that survival was not just about enduring hardship. It was about finding a place where one could heal, grow, and even hope for a better future. The homestead became more than a shelter. It became a home, a place where she could be herself, where her past was honored but did not define her, and where the promise of tomorrow was not a source of fear, but of cautious, steadfast hope. The months had passed like the slow turning of the seasons. Naeli had grown stronger, both in body and spirit, and the harsh winter that had marked her arrival had melted into the warmth of spring. Flowers began to bloom in the small garden she tended, and the land around the homestead came alive with the soft green of new grass. Birds returned to the trees, singing songs that seemed to echo the quiet joy that had slowly grown in her heart. The homestead, once a strange and intimidating place, now felt like a home. Each day brought a rhythm of work and care, and Naeli had grown skilled at her tasks. She could rise before sunrise, help feed the animals, carry water from the stream, and prepare meals for herself and the cowboy. The chores were demanding, but they no longer felt like punishment. Instead, they gave her a sense of purpose, a sense of accomplishment, and the quiet satisfaction of contributing to something that mattered. She had discovered that hard work could be fulfilling, that her hands could create and nurture rather than just endure. The cowboy continued to be patient, supportive, and kind, teaching her with gentle guidance rather than force. He never rushed her, never judged her mistakes, and celebrated her successes quietly but sincerely. Naomi felt a growing trust in him, a feeling she had thought impossible after all she had suffered. She had learned to recognize the difference between fear and genuine care, and she now felt safe in his presence. The quiet evenings spent by the fire, sharing stories and laughter, had become the highlight of her days. Over time, their companionship deepened. The cowboy was not only her protector but also a teacher, a friend, and eventually someone she came to care for deeply. Naomi began to understand the ways of his life on the frontier, the rhythm of the seasons, the challenges of caring for the land and animals, and the quiet strength it took to live honestly and honorably in a harsh world. In return, she shared her own stories, her heritage, and the lessons of her people. The cowboy listened with respect and curiosity, valuing every word. These exchanges created a bridge between their worlds, connecting her past to her present in a way that was healing and empowering. There were still moments of fear and sadness. Naomi would sometimes wake at night, haunted by memories of her village, the raid, and the days of hunger and captivity. She would feel the old ache of loss and the weight of uncertainty. But now, those moments were met with comfort rather than despair. The cowboy would sit with her quietly, sometimes speaking softly, sometimes offering only his presence. Gradually, the memories became less like chains and more like threads in the tapestry of her life, reminders of her resilience and the journey she had survived. As the years passed, Naomi grew confident not only in her abilities but in her own identity. She could ride the horses with skill, care for the animals, and manage parts of the homestead on her own. The tasks that had once seemed impossible now became familiar and satisfying. She felt a deep sense of pride in herself, a pride that had been nearly extinguished by her hardships. And she began to notice a quiet admiration in the cowboy's gaze, a respect for her strength, resilience, and determination. It was a silent acknowledgement of the courage she carried within her, courage that no auction, no raid, and no hardship could ever fully take away. Naomi also began to feel the beginnings of love. Not the fiery, overwhelming kind she had only heard about in stories, but a steady, quiet, and comforting affection. It was the kind of love that grew from shared work, trust, and mutual respect. The cowboy had shown her kindness when she was most vulnerable, patience when she was uncertain, and faith in her abilities when she doubted herself. These small but significant gestures accumulated over time, creating a bond deeper than either could have imagined. Naomi realized that she had found someone who did not see her as property, as a prize, or as a burden, but as an equal and a partner. Word of their partnership eventually reached the nearby town. Some townsfolk were curious, others skeptical, and a few whispered about the Apache woman who had survived the auction. But Naomi no longer feared their opinions. She had built a life, a home, and a sense of belonging that was entirely her own. The cowboy had earned their respect as well, not through wealth or force, but through honesty, integrity, and his steady treatment of Naomi. Together, they became a quiet example of resilience and compassion, living a life that combined strength, care, and shared purpose. There were celebrations of small victories, too. Spring planting, summer harvests, and winter preparations became moments of shared accomplishment. Naomi's skills grew, and with them, her confidence. She learned to plant seeds, care for livestock, mend fences, and repair tools. She discovered that life was not just about survival, but about nurturing, growing, and creating something lasting. Each success built her sense of identity and belonging, reminding her that she had worth and purpose beyond the hardships she had endured. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Naomi and the cowboy sat together outside, their horses grazing nearby. The air was warm for the first time in months, carrying the scent of the earth, the grass, and the nearby stream. Naomi looked around at the homestead, the house, the animals, the thriving garden, and felt a sense of peace she had never known in her life. She realized that she was no longer the frightened, hungry girl on the auction block. She had grown into a strong, capable, and respected woman, and she owed much of that growth to the quiet patience and unwavering support of the cowboy. In that moment, she made a silent promise to herself. She would honor her past, her family, and her heritage, but she would also embrace the life she had built here. She would not forget the hardships she had endured, but she would use them as reminders of her resilience. And she would continue to grow, learn, and share her strength with others, just as the cowboy had shared his patience, kindness, and wisdom with her. As time went on, Nayeli and the cowboy became inseparable partners in life. Their bond was based on mutual respect, shared labor, and the quiet understanding that comes from overcoming hardship together. They worked side by side in the fields, cared for the animals, and maintained the homestead with steady hands and hearts. There were moments of laughter, quiet evenings by the fire, and simple joys that made their life rich despite the challenges of the frontier. Nayeli felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She was valued, respected, and loved, not because of what she could provide or because of her past, but because of who she was. The years also brought new opportunities for Nayeli to share her story and her wisdom. Travelers passing through the region would sometimes stop by the homestead, and Nayeli would speak carefully of her experiences, of survival, and of hope. She spoke not with bitterness, but with strength and resilience, showing others that hardship could be overcome and that kindness could exist even in a harsh world. People began to admire her courage and determination, and her story became a quiet inspiration to those who heard it. Nayeli's life had transformed completely from the frightened, starving girl on the auction block. She had found safety, dignity, and purpose in a world that had once seemed cruel and unforgiving. She had learned to trust, to care, and to love, and in return she had been treated with respect, patience, and compassion. The cowboy, who had first seen her as more than an object, had helped her discover her strength and her worth. Together, they had built a life that honored both her past and her present, creating a future full of hope and possibility. In her heart, Nayeli knew that life was not perfect. There would always be challenges, moments of fear, and reminders of what she had lost. But she had learned to face those challenges with courage, to meet fear with patience, and to carry her past as a source of strength rather than shame. She had discovered that resilience, kindness, and love could coexist even in a harsh world, and that the smallest acts of care could change a life forever. And so, as the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across the homestead, Nayeli stood beside the cowboy, watching their horses graze and listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. She felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet pride, and a hope that would carry her through the rest of her life. She was no longer the last Apache woman on the auction block. She was Nayeli, strong, respected, and loved. And for the first time in a long while, she believed that her story, her real living story, was just beginning.